What a day it was for the Kansas State Wildcats on National Signing Day.
You are Locked On Kansas State, your daily podcast on the Kansas State Wildcats, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Yes, welcome on in to Locked On Kansas State, your daily Kansas State Wildcats podcast. I'm your host, Christian Rao. You can find me on Twitter at Christian S. Rao, and thank you so much for making Locked On Kansas State your first listen every single day. Today's show is brought to you by FanDuel. You can start the season off with a big return on FanDuel. New customers can place a $5 bet, and you'll get started with $150 in bonus bets if you win on your first $5 bet. So visit FanDuel.com to get started. Well, we're going to get started today with what Kansas State did on Wednesday. It was a huge day on Wednesday for Kansas State on National Signing Day. Overall, the program picked up 26 guys spread out across many positions. And according to head coach Chris Kleiman, they got everyone that they were after. You know, you got to love when a good plan comes together. All of the players they fought after, they got. Not a lot of flips against Kansas State. And the reason that flip didn't happen, we talked about in yesterday's episode, big reason that stayed true. 5-star tight end Linkon Cure is staying put. Yep, that's right. He's staying in Manhattan. He's going to be a Kansas State Wildcat for 2025. And that's huge news for the program. That's huge news for the class, for the fans, and for the state of Kansas. Gotta love that. And, you know, he's thrilled, and why shouldn't he be? I'm talking about Coach Kleiman here. He's very thrilled. He said he talked about the due diligence about what Linkon Cure did in his post-conference today. And he said, quote, "I thought Linkon did a good job doing his due diligence. That's what young men are doing right now, and I'm good with that." It came down to what his heart told him when it talks about him staying with Kansas State. Now, look, you can't live in a bubble. You can't just live under a rock, if you will. You have to understand that these high school players who are making a very tough decision for their life, regardless of the money, regardless of what things are happening, this is a huge step in their life, in their career moving forward. It makes perfect sense why a guy like Linkon Cure, who has multiple offers on the table, to take another visit. It doesn't change the fact that he is fully on board with being a Kansas State Wildcat, because obviously he stuck true and stayed with Kansas State. You can't blame him or doubt him for doing what he did this past weekend. Because I feel like, you know, probably if you were in his shoes, I can say that for myself, I would probably be doing the same thing. See every opportunity for what it's worth. So I'm glad he's with us. I'm glad that he's going to be a Wildcat for 2025, because I think big things are ahead of him. And so does Coach Chris Kleiman. I mean, he really talked about what he thinks that it can be of Linkon Cure moving forward for 2025 and beyond. And I'm pretty sure that the beyond portion is part of the reason he's staying. If there's talks that there is a lot of money on the table for him staying for multiple years moving forward, we'll see how that all works out. But what Chris Kleiman really talked about, and what caught my eye, or caught my ear, I guess I should say, is he called him a flex guy in the press conference yesterday. And he did say he's one of the best athletes in not only the state, but the country. And I do agree with that. But the flex guy portion really pondered a question for me. And why I think that comment is interesting is because Linkon also did come out and say that he's going to finish high school sports. He's not going to, just stop everything and focus on football. He's not going to be an early, he's not coming, early to the team. He's going to play basketball, and he's going to play track for his high school squad this coming season. If he's going to play basketball and track, what does that mean for him trying to put on size for a tight end for his freshman season? That flex guy portion, could that be something where maybe he doesn't get that size needed to be a power for a conference level tight end right off the bat? Or was that kind of a nod from Coach Kleiman for him saying being a flex guy is kind of giving us a sneak peek of what their plans are for trying to make him more of a wide receiver type role in his freshman season? That's going to be really interesting for sure. And I'm really excited to see what happens with him. That wide receiver group is already really exciting, and they added 3 more as well. We'll talk about that later on in this show. But You have to love what you got from this class. Again, 26 guys spread out across multiple positions, and it's a very exciting class. Now, if we look at the class overall rankings, overall across the major recruiting outlets, Kansas State found themselves at least a top 40 program in the country for the 2025 class. It is one of the best classes the Wildcats have had in quite some time, and it should reflect nicely on the field this next season. Now, according to the 4 major recruiting outlets, 24/7 had them ranked 35th, on 338th. Rivals had them at the lowest at 40, and at the highest, ESPN had them at 30th. Overall, I'm also seeing that they're either being placed either somewhere between 2nd and 4th in the Big 12 for the best recruiting classes in the conference. They're behind TCU and then sometimes behind Baylor and Colorado. So you have to like that. You have to like where they're at right now. And that's got to give you a good feeling, especially we talked about it yesterday. Start off the season 7-1. You have a tough time to finish off the year. You still have a bowl game. The season's not over. Remember that, folks. But you didn't lose anyone from recruiting, even though you had a rough second half of the season. That's pretty huge. And that shows that these recruits, this class, has a lot of faith in Coach Kleiman, as they should, and the rest of this coaching staff and the players around them. Leading the charge, Avery Johnson, at your quarterback, your signal caller. That's a good feeling moving into 2025 and beyond. And even though it was an off year for Kansas State, just based on how they started the year, they're still one of only 8 teams in the past 4 seasons to have at least 8 wins every single year. So if that's a bad year for Kansas State, what's the future hold for them after having a great class like this, one of the best recruiting classes they've had in quite some time? It is very exciting. And you should be very excited for what just happened on Wednesday. We're about to dig into the transfer portal now. All the momentum is on Kansas State's side. All of the momentum. We're going to hear with the bowl news where we're going to go for a bowl game quite soon as well. There was a bowl game that was just announced for the Big 12. The Frisco Bowl is out of the question now. West Virginia got that bid for the Big 12. I still think we're going to go to the Liberty Bowl, as I mentioned yesterday, in Memphis, Tennessee. So all the momentum is sitting with Kansas State. And you're heading to the transfer portal with some shoes to fill, some holes to fill. Absolutely. But how can you not be excited about what this staff's going to do and have faith and confidence that this staff is going to get the job done after signing such a huge and productive and what should be a very exciting class in 2025. It's very exciting. Up next, I want to talk about, plenty of things. We got to talk about plenty of things on this show, but the K-State won an in-state battle against the Jayhawks. Always a fun thing, right? When we beat Kansas in something. And a recent firing in the Big 12 also brought back a familiar recruit to Manhattan. We're going to cover them next, right here on Locked On Kansas State. But first, let me talk to you guys about FanDuel. FanDuel is honestly, it's just one of the best sports books out there for sure, but get ready to tackle all the action you need with FanDuel, America's #1 sports books. Not just the best, America's #1 sports book. When I'm looking at these odds right now, Kansas State football obviously not playing, and the odds right now for the game on Saturday between Kansas State and St. John's are not out yet on FanDuel, and I'm sure that'll be out very soon. Probably come out sometime while you're listening to this show, maybe. Just is not out yet. But looking at the Big 12 championship game, that's the one that I'm focused on right now. Iowa State, Arizona State. Arizona State's currently a 2.5-point favorite heading into this one. That's basically a pick 'em, if you will. And if you think that Iowa State can hold tight with this one, you think it's maybe a close game, maybe even closer than Farmageddon, maybe you want to give Iowa State a chance at this one, plus 3 points. Or if you think Arizona State, even with their injuries, can go ahead and get the victory. But go ahead and you check out those duels. You can check out those odds at FanDuel. Some really nice odds going on right now. And if you are a new customer, you can bet $5 and get a $150 bet in bonus bets if you win. FanDuel Sportsbook app gives you everything you need to place live bets as well on NFL, college football, and more, all in one place. So if you get a hunch in the middle of your game, you can check out the live stats, live play-by-play, and so much more on the same page where you place your bets. How convenient is that? So just get started with $150 in bonus bets if you win on your first $5 bet. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today. That's FanDuel.com. Never waste a hunch and make every moment more with FanDuel, the official sports partner of the NFL. Welcome back to Locked On Kansas State, your daily podcast for the Kansas State Wildcats. And for your second listen, check out Locked On Big 12. They just had a preview talking about who they think is going to win between Arizona State and Iowa State, as I just mentioned a minute ago, and it should be a really good one. Drake Toll takes you through all the exciting things, everything in the conference. Make sure you check that out for your second listen of today. Kansas State City kid is staying home. I mean, there's some really interesting things happening. And Kansas State battled in an in-state battle against the Kansas Jayhawks and won. They defeated the Jayhawks for wide receiver 3-star Larry Porter IV. He chose the Wildcats after a long recruiting battle between K-State and KU. And it's going to be a really good one. I think it's going to be a really big pick for Kansas State and just adds even more fun to this wide receiver group. Porter was a finalist for the Otis Taylor Award. He led all players in the state of Missouri in receiving yards and touchdowns. Really exciting kid. In just 10 games, he had 92 receptions for over 1,400 yards and 18 touchdowns. Let me say that again. Almost 100 receptions, almost 1,500 yards, and almost 20 touchdowns in 10 games. That's incredible. Just getting that type of production, knowing where the end zone is, this kid knows exactly where it is. And that's something that you got to be really excited about getting on your roster for 2025. That wide receiver group, that room is going to be so fun this offseason. I'm really excited to see the battles that are going to happen moving into the spring, because there's going to be some, especially if some of those players we talk about later on stay and stick around, because that absolutely will be huge for the confidence and just the success of Kansas State moving forward. Also, Sirius Stinyard out of Tampa Bay, Florida. He signed with the Wildcats as well. He was one of the guys that was on the board last summer for Kansas State. Ultimately chose West Virginia. He was committed for West Virginia, but after the Neil Brown firing, he did open back up his commitment, or his recruitment, if you will. Kleiman discussed in his press conference that they reached back out to him this past week, and it looks like they got him the second time around. He signed yesterday, and he's going to be in as one of the cornerbacks taken in this class. Another huge pickup. Secondary is something that was a little bit of a question mark, but if you think about it, when you're talking about the secondary, that's something that, this is a position group that you could totally see playing right away, either of special teams or on defense. The secondary is definitely one of those spots that has an easy chance to be playing so often. So really cool there. And honestly, I think this is a big thing, being able to win something against Kansas. You always got to have that. Out of the 26 being signed, 5 of the recruits are from in-state Kansas, and you got to love that, especially when you get to lead the charge with a guy like Linkon Cure at the number one guy, the top guy in Kansas, being one of those guys. So it's two of those guys that we talk about. The wide receiver, Porter, the fourth, really fun. I'm excited to see what we see from him, and Sirius Stinyard. We're going to talk about more in depth of all these players, and we're going to dig into these recruits over the offseason, probably once we get past the portal news, because there's going to be a lot of portal news dropping, starting, as we've already seen it today, and moving forward. But really, the bread and butter, it's really going to get juicy starting on Monday when it officially opens. So we'll probably dig more into this class of 2025, give an entire segment or maybe an entire episode of some of these players, and really dig into why this player was such a good add for Kansas State, how they can impact the roster moving forward, because I do think that's a really good idea. And I do think it's good to know where each position group sits, and maybe we'll start projecting and predicting the depth chart moving into spring ball. We're going to do a lot of fun stuff getting ready for the football season in 2025. We still got a bowl game. Remember, I want to wrap up today's episode with some final notes from Coach Kleiman. He had a really good press conference after National Signing Day. And I'll talk some of the other notable signees as well that I'm really excited about and who I think can actually make an immediate impact next season. We're going to do that right here on Locked On Kansas State. Welcome back to Locked On Kansas State, your daily podcast for the Kansas State Wildcats. And we're talking about National Signing Day, how the Kansas State Wildcats did amazing. 26 players, finishing either somewhere between 30th and 40th in the nation in recruiting classes, the top quarter in the conference, either second, third, or fourth. How can you not be excited about what Kansas State is doing right now with their freshman class? When you add that all together with their freshman class, some of the sophomores they have on their roster, and so far, what we've seen from the transfer portal, nothing huge yet, and hopefully that stays that way. How can you not be excited of what's moving forward for this team? And Chris Kleiman really helped that. I mean, if you watch his press conference on Wednesday, it was tough not to get excited. And it was tough not to just see why be excited for the future, why you shouldn't be, because there was just so many good things that he talked about and how he thought that every single one of these players can be a huge impact right away, how he was excited that he got all the players that he was going for. And you got to love that. You really do. He had a really good day. That's what we talked about. He talks about how multiple players flipped back to K-State just last night. I think that was really leading towards the Linkon Cure news, but there were a couple players also who were on the fringe and wound up sticking with Kansas State. Linkon Cure obviously being the number one that was real focused there. As I mentioned a couple times in this show, 26 kids signed, 5 from Kansas, also 5 from Texas, and 4 from Florida, and 3 from Missouri. So a good mix of that pipeline, that normal Kansas State pipeline that we've seen. Out of the 26 kids, we're seeing 17 from those 4 states. That's quite normal, but it's really exciting. What isn't normal is that out of those 26, 10 of them have came from either the linebackers and safety spot. They knew they needed some help with the linebackers, so they went with the linebacking core, and they got 5 of them. They also got 5 safeties. Now, Coach Kleiman did say that some of those safeties could probably transition to corner, so he considered them actually kind of defensive backs, if you will. And so 5 safeties, 5 linebackers, something to pay attention to when we head in the spring ball. You're probably going to get some of those at red shirt, but there's going to be some good competition this offseason. Really fun things to talk about here. They also signed 3 offensive linemen. That's something that we're going to talk about a lot in the transfer portal over this week. And we talk about moving forward all the way up to spring ball because they're losing a ton on the offensive line. A lot of people graduating, moving on. That's probably going to be one of the most positions that are probably hurt the most after just this season because of eligibility wise. So getting 3 young offensive linemen, that's huge, but I think they still got a lot more work to do there. And they also signed, 3 wide receivers. So that's awesome as well. I think it's actually 4 wide receivers now. Hit all the position groups that they wanted from the high school development side. And that's something that he emphasized. He emphasized how they still wanted to build from the high school side, despite the portal era. And he was huge on saying we were going to continue getting our 23, 24, 25 kids, and in this case, 26 in the high school side. He talked about how his coaching staff wants to continue to build that community, that culture of getting a 4 or 5, and in some cases with that COVID year, 6-year players sticking around in the program. And then just adding small pieces here and there to fill the needed holes in the transfer portal. And I think that's a great way to build your team. And not everyone's doing that right now. So being able to stay more of I guess you could have to call that the traditional route these days, that could really come in handy for, building your core and keeping it for multiple seasons, as long as you can keep that culture, because that's huge with this transfer portal right now. And I think the culture is really good with Kansas State, despite the second half struggles, because so far we haven't seen a mass exodus into the transfer portal. No big names are swirling, saying that they might leave. Now, there was a couple about Jace Brown swirling around. We don't have any answers of what's going to happen there. Wide receiver for the Wildcats. We'll see what happens coming this week and the next coming days. But overall, this idea of sticking with the high school kids as your general basis and then just adding pieces in the portal is a huge key to success, I think, overall. And I think that's a great way for Coach Kleiman to stick around. Now, there's a couple players that I thought there were some notable key signees that I thought could make immediate impacts moving into 2025. And again, we're going to dig into each player, at least a segment or an episode moving forward, probably after the portal, after the bowl game. So maybe when we start the new year. But Noah King is one right off the bat. And if you paid attention to this recruiting class, you'll see Noah King. He's a 4-star defensive back out of Ohio. Other than Linkon Cure, he's your highest recruit. He's one of the highest defensive recruits that Kansas State's had in quite some time. Last time I checked, I believe it was about since 2014. Don't quote me on that, actually. I don't know the year, but it's been quite some time for one of the highest defensive recruits coming in. And he's already showing leadership qualities, and that's really exciting. We've already seen, if you looked at his highlights, you can see that this guy's a baller. He's not afraid to, he's just a really good football player. He's not afraid to make some plays, and we've seen that in his high school tape. But the thing that's really interesting is some of the intangibles he's already showing. As a freshman, as a young leader, he's showing those qualities. And Kleiman expressed it too in the press conference. He said that he sees it too. And as I mentioned earlier, defensive back is a position that you can play early at as well. And I expect him to make an immediate impact for the Wildcats in 2025, not just on special teams, but in the secondary as well. Would not be surprised to see him get at least top 4, top 5, and I might even be lowballing this in snap counts in the secondary in 2025 if he stays healthy moving forward. This is the kid that can absolutely do it at a Power 5 level, Power 4 level, and do it right away. His game, if you look at his highlight, should translate very easy over to this level. He's got the speed, he's got what it takes to be a cornerback or just somewhere in the secondary at the Power 4 level. So really excited to see what Noah King can do. And again, we're going to break down his game more later on in the year. Overall, I also think the wide receiver room is going to be fun to watch next season. Kind of teased that earlier in this show. But with the arrival of both R.J. Collins, Adonis Mose, I think I mispronounced his name. I apologize. New Concepcion is going to be good as well. There's some rumors that his brother, who also entered the transfer portal, could be swirling and making his way to Kansas State. That room should be loaded, especially if both Jace Brown and Trey Spivey are leading the way in 2025, and hopefully they stick around. We're going to have a full episode breaking down the wide receiver room and some potential portal chatter. As I mentioned here, the transfer portal is wide open, and there's a couple players that have already received offers from Kansas State moving into the portal. So I don't think they're done adding what isn't already an impressive unit for Kansas State. So keep that in mind. It's going to be really exciting. So let's wrap this all up. Let's wrap up National Signing Day and get moving on to the transfer portal, because that's where it's going to get fun, and we can start adding the key players that are needed to make an impact, and we know should make an immediate impact for 2025 and maybe not even beyond, just 2025. And that's what the portal's for, to kind of fill those holes. And we're going to get to that starting on Monday. That's where it's going to really get juicy. That's where the portal officially opens December 9th. So let's get into that. But overall, remember, Kansas State found themselves with at least a top 40 program. They finished 30th, according to ESPN. Rivals had them at the lowest at 40th, 24/7, 35th, and On3, 38th. I really love what I'm seeing from this recruiting class. And it's got to be really exciting to be in that room right now, to be a part of that. And more than half of them are going to be early enrollees. They're going to be ready for spring ball. And that's awesome. That means they're going to be around the team. They're going to be around the campus. They're going to be able to do nutrition, working with their bodies, strength conditioning, all that good stuff, getting an extra half year, if you will, of eligibility in already a world that's getting extra eligibility. That's pretty cool. And that's something that you should really, that's an unsung part of this little piece right here. More than half of the 26 recruits are going to be in early for Kansas State. You got to love that. Tomorrow, we're going to be back, and we're going to actually shift things over to the basketball side of things so we can preview the Big 12 and Big East preview. The Big East showdown between Kansas State and St. John's. This is a huge game because the Wildcats could really use a huge win like this one as they enter the peak of their non-conference schedule. This is a game where if they make a moment, if they make an impact, if they can show that they are the team that we expect them to be, then I think we can starting to have some warm and fuzzies for the squad as we get closer and closer to conference play. The Big 12 so far is not doing good in this showdown. If you looked at what happened on Wednesday night, UConn defeated Baylor. It was just there's a lot of things not going well so far with the Big 12 Big East showdown. Maybe Kansas State can be one of those saving graces for the conference for basketball. Maybe that could be what they need for them to turn around this season. They're not having a bad year. It's just where they need to be is not where they are at this moment. So let's see if they can bounce back. We'll have a full preview for you on tomorrow's show. But until then, please subscribe. We'll be back here next time. And until then, this has been Locked On Kansas State.